So we're pleased to welcome our panel. Come and join us. Stephanie, bring them on board. Let me introduce our colored orange moderator. Stephanie Rico is the Business Initiatives Manager for Environmental Affairs at Wells Fargo headquarters in San Francisco. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hello, everyone.
Keep on going.
Hello.
Wake up. We have an hour and a half to go before the reception, so please hang in there with us. All right. Well, I'm honored to be here today. I'm Stephanie Rico. I'm with Wells Fargo. And we're here to talk about community resiliency. And let me give you just a little bit of background about myself, and then what I'm going to do is we're going to introduce our panelists today. So I'm with Wells Fargo, and why are we here today talking about community resiliency? Well, we've been working on community resiliency now for, gosh, well, certainly longer than I've been there. I've only been there for 11 years. And it's, you know, there's so much happening. We've been focused on sustainability, and what we realized is you really can't do sustainability without considering resiliency. And so we are aiming to put our arms around community resiliency. I've been tasked at leading the company's efforts around community resiliency. And what I've learned is that there's just so much going on across the board, within the cities, within the communities, within private sector. And the efforts are so big, it's not defined, right? There's no prescription, necessarily a roadmap on how we're going to get there. And so the purpose of this session is really to stop for a minute and be intentional and thoughtful about reflecting on some of the successes that we've had around resiliency. And that's where our panelists come in. And so today we're going to talk about some successes. We're also going to talk about some challenges, some financial challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And before I turn it over, we're going to do a quick introduction. And I will say, because I am with Wells Fargo, and obviously, we've been in the news a lot lately, we kind of have a storm going on. We're going to be resilient in that way, too. But for this panel, we're focusing in on community resiliency. So with that, let me turn it over to Laura. If you could give a quick introduction of yourself, name, rank, number.
Okay. Hi, I'm happy to be here today. My name is Laura Bloch. I'm the Sustainability Advisor for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Region 9, located in San Francisco, just across the bridge. And we cover California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands.
All right, Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Meese. I'm the Executive Director of the Local Government Commission, and we're a nonprofit. We work nationally and have a huge presence here in California. We have over 700 local government members, and we work with our local government members to build sustainable communities. So that's our focus, and I'll be talking more about our work throughout the panel.
And Larry?
Hi, I'm Larry Goldsband. I'm Executive Director of the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, known around the Bay Area as BCDC. The Bay, which is right out, everybody look to your right, that's the Bay. It's bigger than the city of Los Angeles. It's bigger than the combined cities of San Diego and San Jose. 500 linear miles of shoreline. It's a state protected resource, and BCDC, the oldest coastal zone management agency in the United States, is responsible to ensure that the development and conservation of its resources is appropriate.
All right. So now, with our amount of time, we're going to dig in. And we have here our pioneers of resiliency. And so what we're going to do is dig into some quick examples, if you can all provide one example each of what you would consider a success around resiliency. And we're going to start with Larry.
Sure. About 6 years ago, BCDC instituted the first regulations pretty much in the United States, which actively regulate how you can develop along a shoreline given rising sea level. And that's sort of the stick approach on the regulatory side. On the planning side, BCDC, along with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, created the Adapting to Rising Tides program, commonly known as ART, which actually goes neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, and not only teaches people how they can adapt and how they can sustain and prosper in light of rising sea level, but actually provide them with the tools to create their own strategies to do so. We've had tremendous success. Indeed, seems to be the model that everybody seems to be copying, including, for example, the Department of Defense, which has an awful lot of shoreline to be resilient. And we've had tremendous success here in Richmond with it. So the ART program is an example of how people can actually be prepared for a slow-moving emergency, which is very different than how the Bay Area has prepared for the upcoming earthquake whenever that happens.
Thank you. Kate?
So the project I want to highlight is a new initiative the local government started in partnership with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and it's called Civic Spark. It's an AmeriCorps program, and we're placing 68 AmeriCorps fellows with cities and counties across the state to work on climate change initiatives. So they're placed for 11 months. It's really low cost to the municipalities, so it's about $25,000 for a year almost of full-time work. And they're doing really exciting projects around climate change. So we had some fellows work with the city of Morro Bay, and they were able to get their solar permitting streamlined from a 2 to 3 week turnaround all the way down to same day or next day. So huge changes. We had a couple fellows work on a project in LA where they developed a tool to measure potential water savings, and they were able to identify 280 million gallons of water that could potentially be saved at a savings of $1.7 million. So for a $25,000 investment, that's pretty substantial. And we've seen other projects doing climate change curriculum for school districts or turf replacement programs in the valley. We had fellows work on the art project. So this is a great example of how you can create momentum in communities at a low cost and in some ways, more importantly, train the next cadre of environmental leaders. We have a Civic Spark member, a former member here today. Erica, are you still out in the audience? If you can find Erica, she's a great example of someone who went through the program and is still working in this field in the Bay Area and adding a lot of expertise and passion. So it's a program that's worth looking at, available in cities across California.
And I will say, just for full disclosure, that at Wells Fargo, we're thinking, well, what can we do around resiliency besides working at our own operations and thinking about it in lending, et cetera? And we thought, well, one of the many things that we can do is use our philanthropy. And so we contribute to the Civic Spark program, and this is the second year that we've contributed to Civic Spark Fellows, and it's been great. So, Laura, please.
I'm excited to be here. And what I work on complements the work that LGC is working on. And it's a little bit outside the box for what EPA is usually known for. And it's called Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities. And basically the idea is the university partners up with a local city and works on projects in the city's own sustainability or resiliency action plan. So what's a little bit different about the usual connection between the university and the city is the scale of engagement. They can work on 10, 20, 30 or more projects across 10 to 12 disciplines, 40,000 plus student hours. So there's a lot of benefit that the city gets, not just in terms of projects getting accomplished, but also in terms of having disenfranchised parts of the community brought into the fold, connecting different parts of the city that aren't usually connected to each other, bringing in state-of-the-art research with the faculty that are involved with the students. So Environmental Protection Agency, we're interested and committed to improving the health and the resiliency and the sustainability of communities. And we do a lot of work in that area, but we have a limited capacity. So looking at leveraging a framework, the EPIC framework that came out of one university, the University of Oregon, and we held a workshop about a year and a half ago, July of 2015, in conjunction with the California Higher Education Sustainability Conference. And from that workshop, at the time there were about 12 of these EPIC programs throughout the US, and we got 7 new partnerships that came out of that, just that one workshop. And so we're continuing. I'm working with my sustainability colleagues in the other regions. There's 10 regions. And in a few weeks, we're going to be holding a workshop. Well, they'll be holding a workshop in Region 5. And then we're going to be holding a workshop in conjunction with with the Smart Growth Conference. So I want to make a plug for people that are associated with cities or foundations. Stephanie, their foundation, also provided money for the EPIC network, which is a network of universities. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you. And that kind of leads into this notion of collaboration. And many of the panels today talked about collaboration. And as I was thinking about collaboration and thinking about technology, technology is always an innovation. It's set up to, not save the world, but there's a lot of hope. And I also have hope in that. But I think collaboration is not the new technology, but there's not enough said about the importance of collaboration. And I don't know if collaboration is an opportunity, but also a challenge. And so as we talk about challenges, feel free to talk about other challenges that you might have, but I'm very interested in your thoughts around collaboration as it relates to resiliency. And
just jump on in.
Jump on in.
I'll start, and I'll start trying not to be negative, which is how many times have you actually seen governmental organizations working collaboratively with each other in some way that you actually understand? I mean, it doesn't happen terribly often, to be honest with you, because we're all in silos. But around the Bay Area, one of the things that we figured out how to do pretty well is to work with local governments, because that's what BCDC does well, including the city of Richmond, and Mayor Budd is here. Tom, you should raise your hand and make sure people know that right there is the city mayor and where you are now sitting. And Tom is a member of BCDC. And we also work very well with the State Coastal Conservancy and with counties and with regional agencies. And we do so basically because we know that if we don't, we'll fail. It's not easy to do it. And it's really not easy to do it because you have your own authority and they have their own authority and you have separate jurisdictions or overlapping jurisdictions. And it's really sometimes pretty miserable to try to figure it out. But if you don't do it, you're not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So this is happening at the regional level in a number of different regions across the state. We support a coalition called the Alliance for Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation. ARCA doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but this is bringing together regions like what Larry's doing here in the Bay Area. San Diego's involved, Los Angeles is involved, Sacramento, and the Sierra Nevada region. And in each of those areas, you have multiple stakeholders, you have multiple agencies coming together, universities coming together to research risks associated with climate change and then develop solutions that cut across these different sectors, which is critical. And I think what's really exciting about doing this at the state level is we have challenges that are crossing our regions as well. So we worked really hard to get the Sierra Nevada region included in ARCA because we recognize that what they're doing with forest management, with water management, is greatly impacting the Bay Area, is impacting folks across the state. So together, we're learning from each other on research and programs and policies that work, but then we're also going to the state and engaging in ways that support each other. A lot of times, the Sierra Nevada is advocating for policies that seem like more rural policies, and if we can get the urban areas to understand our interconnectedness and support them, then we can be much more powerful together.
Yeah, and as a federal agency, one of the roles that we can play and should play and are playing is convening and bringing different stakeholder groups together. So collaboration with nonprofits, for-profits, industry, local governments, Indian tribes, the variety of different entities that we work with. And I think that's really important. I have a couple of colleagues here that work a lot with local governments and local areas through climate change issues, through brownfields, and having EPA at the table, I think, is really important, and our role in terms of collaboration is really helpful in bringing the different folks together. And through the Educational Partnership for Innovation in Communities framework, it's a really great way to get the collaboration at disparate parts of the community as well. So.
I should also mention, given that we have the US EPA here, probably the most successful collaboration from an environmental perspective that actually has worked throughout the Bay Area over the past 10 to 15 years is what's called the Long-Term Management Strategy, which is a coalition of BCDC, state agency, Regional Water Quality Board, federal EPA, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And that's why you actually have dredging in the Bay, and that's why you have a lot of those dredge spoils, not enough, actually then be used for the creation of wetlands. And so we've done an awful lot of work on permitting and on different types of chemical analyses, and really worked well together collaboratively to shorten the time frame required to actually get stuff done.
Fantastic. And so before we transition to the next topic, which is finance, I'm going to stop for a minute and see if anyone from the audience has any questions or wants to jump into this conversation about successes and collaboration.
They're shy.
They're not shy. I saw them earlier.
They're stunned into silence.
All right. Well, we'll come back. There'll be more opportunities. So for now, we're going to jump into one of my favorite topics, finance. And so, we've heard that finance can be a challenge when it comes to resiliency. It's because financing resiliency it's different because there isn't always a revenue stream that's going to pay back. That's a conventional revenue stream. There could be other risk mitigation, maybe something from insurance or this or that, but it's still kind of new and different. And so I'm wondering if you've encountered any challenges with respect to you're laughing.
I have a feeling we all have.
Yes.
Every single person in this audience
Challenges
has.
associated with financing resiliency projects, and what are some of the ways that you've overcome those challenges, presuming that you have? And Kate, I'm going to just start with you, please.
Well, so I think there's been a lot of attention on new funding sources, and a lot of attention has been paid, in particular in California, to our cap and trade funds that are coming in. And we've all sort of squabbled around the $3.1 billion that are available in this budget. And if you break out what's already allocated for high-speed rail and for affordable housing and sustainable communities, you end up with about half of that. Well, meanwhile, we're making decisions on the 5-year state infrastructure plan that is allocating $55 billion. So we need to be looking at the funding that we're already spending and bringing a resiliency lens to that. We shouldn't be spending $1 of public money on projects that are going to work against our adaptation goals, that are going to be at risk of climate impacts and aren't going to improve our resiliency. So I think that's number one. I think we also need to be looking at a paradigm shift in terms of how we think about grant funding and state agency funding. I mean, what we see at the local level is you have these great local plans or regional plans, whether it's a general plan, a sustainable community strategy, a climate action plan. It's a comprehensive vision, but then it has to get parsed out through these different departments that are associated with the different state departments where you get your funding from. So we need to really flip that and prioritize and incentivize these integrated projects by, for example, creating a comprehensive pooled funding source for local governments that cuts across these different agencies. If you want to look at your streetscape and you want to put in a bike lane and you want to do water-friendly development and you want to do efficient street lighting and you want to put a number of other pieces in, That's 4 or 5 different state agencies that you have to go to with different metrics. So that's a huge nightmare, and if you scale that out across 482 cities and 58 counties just in California, that's a lot of administrative bureaucracy and inefficiencies that we're building into the system when we have limited funds. So I think streamlining it, making it easier, incentivizing integrated projects, creating a single application like the UC FAFSA type model where you can apply to multiple different state agencies through one application. There are a lot of things we can do to make it an easier process. And then lastly, I think local governments can be more creative about attracting private sector investment. So, you know, I've heard from folks at Goldman Sachs and other places that, you know, there are a lot of good projects in different cities, but the scale isn't big enough to attract private investment. So can we get more creative about bundling projects within a region so that we have that scale to attract the investment?
Thank you. Larry?
One of the things that you find in California is that land use is a local prerogative, which is a big reason why the state has done very, very well when it comes to looking at and dealing with mitigation through cap and trade, through AB 32, and so on, because the regulatory powers of the state can be dealt with and used very well with regard to mitigation. They cannot be used anywhere near as well with regard to land use and therefore with regard to adaptation. So struggling for funding from the state or from pretty much anywhere else in order to actually do adaptation planning is sort of the watchword of what we think about, because there's not a lot of money for adaptation planning. Thankfully, the Bay Area did something pretty remarkable in June. It voted, over 70% of the people who voted in the June primary voted to tax themselves on a parcel-by-parcel property tax basis to actually set up an adaptation fund that can be used to increase the health of the Bay and to actually increase and bolster the amount of wetlands in the Bay, which will make everything more resilient around the Bay and will increase the health of the Bay. That is one way to raise money, taxing yourself. What we hope is that because the Bay Area has demonstrated its willingness to do so, that we'll be able to use that as leverage and as an incentive for the state and for the federal governments also to step in.
Thank you.
And then from the EPA perspective, I guess it's no shock that our budget keeps getting smaller and smaller, but the amount of work that we have to do is actually getting larger. And so we need to look at creative ways to leverage what's already out there, to find different sources of funding within the agency, because we're still siloed, and that's a real issue. When I first came on board, I was kind of surprised at how everything was so siloed, because that wasn't how I was educated in terms of how to deal with environmental, economic, social issues. So that's one of the things that I do for this Educational Partnerships for Innovation Communities. Within Region 9, our management said, oh, this is a great idea, go do it, but we're not going to give you any money. So I had to be creative and go to my colleagues in other parts of the agency and our Office of Research and Development that is developing all these decision support tools that they need to get out into the communities. And so they were willing to put up some funding for EPA to play the important role of convening and educating in terms of bringing the cities and the universities together on this project. So it's looking outside of the box, it's inviting foundations to these workshops as well so they can connect up the cities. So how is the city going to fund this? There's a variety of different ways that cities need to fund it. So it's just kind of trying to think outside the box and be sort of an intrapreneur is the term we use. So.
And for our part, you know, we have our conventional banking products. We have financing for renewable energy and green bonds and things like that. But really, we're using philanthropy to push the envelope and come up with some new financing models for resiliency. And so, like financing for energy efficiency in public schools, and how can we, work. There's a nonprofit we're working with that's looking at expanding the definition of what counts as assets for financing municipal water projects and things like that. And so I'm hopeful that that there'll be some new solutions out there. So before we transition into the hopeful and kind of what we're looking forward to, we do have 4 minutes left. So again, I'm going to stop, and I encourage everyone to ask questions because we've talked about this. That's our favorite part. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoa. Thank you. This is particularly for Larry. I'm interested in how successful you're being in taking those carrots and sticks that you describe and tackling the problem. I know you're looking at quite a bit of sea level rise over the next century. Do you feel like your tools are sufficient? Your funding sufficient? Do you see how you're going to get there?
The funding's not, it's a good question. The funding's not sufficient to put art throughout the Bay. We're doing it sort of piece by piece, sector by sector. We're just starting, for example, with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Caltrans to do a full-scale vulnerability assessment and strategy for the transportation assets. But no, it's going to cost another $10, $11 million, which of course is chump change to an awful lot of folks. But given that our budget is $6 million overall, it basically isn't chump change to us. The real key here, though, and this is, I'd love to hear what you all think about this, is that the Bay Area has prepared forever for earthquakes by essentially being scared into doing stuff. You know, you see the buildings fall and all that in San Andreas, and so you make a kit. Well, it doesn't work to a great extent. Most people don't have kits, and while buildings are, set up, the resilience is simply not there on an individual basis. So what we're trying to do is offer more hope than that. And so we're hopeful that that will actually make people want to become more resilient.
Hello, I'm Jim Caldwell. I work on sustainability issues and internationally with China and U.S. And I am very puzzled by the stories that I'm hearing about financing, because if it's a normal business, you would show that you're going to make more money than you spend, right? And you go, well, pay back. And when it comes to sustainability, all of the studies that we've looked at of successful projects, including from the Smart Cities Council, that there's a motherload of opportunities to make a lot of money, save a lot of money, and make a lot of money while you're improving the environment and sustainability. And people keep going back to their current model, which is we have to work within the budget we have. But I'm just wondering why that is.
Well, I think on mitigation, it's pretty clear that you can invest and you can get a return. On adaptation, depending on what you're doing, you don't know that you're going to get a payback unless there's a disaster that happens. So it's just harder to model for something like that. So if you're saying we're going to retrofit a bunch of homes, you can measure the cost that it's going to take and the benefit you're going to get from that reduced energy use. To put up a seawall or to do some other, so hopefully it's not a seawall, right?
It could be a seawall.
It could be a seawall, it could be a green infrastructure solution. It's just much harder to measure the benefit of if a disaster happens, how much will it cost, and how much did you prevent that additional cost through the measure.
And the easy way to think about it also is there's no revenue stream associated with a wetland. I mean, that's just the way the world works. And so the idea of dealing with avoided cost is sort of how you do it, but that's not the way governments budget. It's not the way governments do accounting.
And who pays and who is experiencing the costs are often different parties as well.
Well,
you
that's
have the
partly
split
the
incentive.
Collaboration issue that we've been talking about, right? If enough groups collaborate, then the net is going to be a benefit. Right?
Yep.
Pay
I think
for
that's
itself.
key, collaboration, absolutely.
Thank you.
We're getting the hook. in.
Can we get one more question from the back microphone?
Yes, and then for you, I think if you're all in agreement, we'll meet you in the corner. Sure. Okay.
I was distracted. I may have missed it, but I don't think I heard anybody talk about the community emergency response teams, the CERT groups. And you talk about resilience. This is where people in the community rely on their neighbors for help. And the scenario we plan for the most is earthquakes. I'm a member of the Campbell CERT team in our little neighborhood. And it occurs to me to ask whether anybody here on this panel has some ideas how to raise awareness about CERT, and especially also to help with funding, because little CERT groups usually are made up of volunteers, and they need a little bit of supplies, not a lot, to be able to respond in that first 72 hours when the first responders are too busy. Anybody, and maybe this is a, I'll make a brazen plea to Wells Fargo to maybe reach out to the to the CERT groups in the Bay Area and see if there's a need for a little bit of funding. It's probably not a lot.
Yeah, we're trying to understand right now. So within, for example, within Wells Fargo, we have our business continuity planning group, and they're the ones that are really would represent more that side, but on the corporate side. And really, the way they talk about it, and I don't know, a number of the leaders are vets, right? And so they talk about things in military terms. And they talk about kind of emergency planning as being right of boom, and they want to get us left of boom. And so what they're talking about is their traditional planning is the emergency planning that happens after an incident occurs, right? And we're really good at that. We're good at tracking our people. We have like emergency response vehicles to come in for like, floods, and helping our mortgage customers, and mobile, ATMs, and with satellites and all this great stuff. But we're really trying to figure out is how do we get left of boom? So before the incident happens, how can we help kind of like, beef up or get ready to have more proactive adaptation before the event happens? And so
I think this exactly addresses that by preparedness. If you can help the community at a very local level to be more prepared, I think that is in concert with what you're talking about.
I agree. What we haven't figured out yet is kind of the joining of the two and what that looks like and how it all comes together. But I agree with you in that it does come together. It's the yin and the yang.
I think David has a funding proposal for Wells Fargo in mind, by the way. That's the challenge with having a money center bank on stage, is everybody thinks you're a bank. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Stephanie for moderating. Appreciate the help.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.